Massive anti-regime protests in Iran have now spread to more than 50 cities, marking the most serious internal challenge to Iranian authorities in years. Iran has experienced protests before, but scale matters. When unrest remains localized, the state can isolate, suppress, and reframe it. Once protests spread across dozens of cities simultaneously, the problem shifts from crowd control to system coordination. Security forces are stretched thinner. Information control becomes harder, and local grievances begin to merge into a national narrative. This is the danger zone for any centralized regime. The spread itself is the signal. It suggests that dissatisfaction is not confined to a single region, class, or trigger event. Instead, it indicates broader legitimacy erosion. When people in different cities with different local conditions reach the same conclusion at the same time, it becomes much harder for the state to dismiss the unrest as foreign agitation or isolated unrest. The timing compounds the risk. Iran is already operating under heavy sanctions pressure, economic strain, and regional tension. Internal instability under those conditions limits the regime's ability to respond cleanly. Excessive force risks escalation. Restraint risks emboldening protests. Either choice carries cost. What makes this moment particularly sensitive is that protests have crossed from economic grievances into symbolic rejection. Once public dissent moves beyond material complaints and into challenges to authority itself, it becomes harder to reverse with concessions alone. At this stage, the key question is not whether the protests will continue tomorrow. The question is whether the regime can prevent fragmentation inside its own enforcement and information systems. History shows that regimes do not fall when protests begin. They fall when coordination breaks. This is why the geographic spread matters more than any single headline number. President Trump has threatened to come to the aid of Iranian protesters if Iranian security forces fire on them, injecting external pressure into an already volatile internal situation. This statement is not an operational commitment. It does not signal imminent military action or direct intervention. What it does signal is narrative escalation. By making the warning public, the United States raises the international cost of repression and reframes internal unrest as a matter of global concern rather than domestic control. That distinction matters. Authoritarian systems rely heavily on the assumption that internal matters will remain internal. Once external actors begin speaking directly to the treatment of protesters, the regime's decision space narrows. Heavy-handed enforcement risks international backlash, additional sanctions, or diplomatic isolation. Restraint, on the other hand, risks emboldening protesters who may interpret external attention as protection. This is a classic pressure tactic. The statement also serves a signaling function beyond Iran. It communicates to allies, adversaries, and global audiences that Washington is watching events on the ground and is willing to attach consequences to escalation. In that sense, the message is as much about deterrence as it is about solidarity. For Iran, the challenge is structural. Security forces are trained to maintain internal order, not to manage international scrutiny in real time. Public warnings from a foreign power complicate command decisions and increase the risk of miscalculation at the local level. The timing amplifies the effect. With protests already spreading and fatalities reported, rhetoric that internationalizes the unrest can accelerate polarization. Protesters may feel encouraged. Authorities may feel cornered. The statement does not determine outcomes, but it raises stakes. At moments like this, words alone can change behavior, not because they carry force, but because they reshape incentives. Iran's defense minister has warned that Tehran will retaliate decisively against any attack, framing recent threats and unrest as a matter of national defense rather than internal instability. This type of language serves a specific purpose. It is deterrence messaging aimed outward, designed to signal resolve and raise the perceived cost of external intervention. By emphasizing retaliation, the state attempts to shift attention away from domestic unrest and reassert control through the language of strength. The timing matters. When a government issues external threats during periods of internal pressure, it is often attempting to unify internal audiences against an outside risk. National security framing can temporarily suppress dissent by redirecting public focus from domestic grievances to external confrontation. However, this strategy carries trade-offs. Escalatory rhetoric narrows flexibility. Once retaliation is publicly promised, restraint becomes harder without appearing weak. This can lock leadership into rigid postures even when de-escalation might otherwise be preferable. There is also a signaling audience beyond adversaries. Statements like this are meant to reassure domestic security forces that the leadership remains confident and in control. In periods of unrest, maintaining loyalty and clarity within enforcement and military institutions becomes critical. Strong language is one tool used to preserve internal cohesion. At the same time, such warnings raise the risk of misinterpretation. External actors may treat the rhetoric as evidence of heightened readiness rather than posturing, increasing the chance of miscalculation. Diplomatic space shrinks as statements harden into positions. Importantly, the warning does not resolve the underlying pressures driving unrest. It addresses symptoms rather than causes. Deterrence can delay escalation, but it cannot restore legitimacy or relieve economic strain. In moments like this, retaliation language is less about initiating conflict and more about controlling narratives under stress. It signals that the state intends to project strength even as it navigates internal and external uncertainty. Whether that projection stabilizes the situation or accelerates confrontation depends on how others respond. A newly installed statue of Iran's president has been toppled just days after its unveiling, a symbolic act that carries more weight than the physical damage itself. Statues are not neutral objects in political systems. They are deliberate expressions of authority, continuity, and legitimacy. When a government installs a new monument to a leader, it is attempting to project permanence and control. When that symbol is destroyed almost immediately, it signals a rejection not just of the figure depicted, but of the authority the figure represents. The speed matters. The fact that the statue was toppled days after installation suggests active resistance rather than long-standing neglect or isolated vandalism. It indicates that opposition is not passive. It is responsive, organized enough to act quickly, and confident enough to target state symbols openly. In periods of unrest, symbolic acts often precede larger shifts. Protests challenge policy. Symbolic defiance challenges legitimacy. Once dissent moves into the symbolic realm, it becomes harder for authorities to contain through economic concessions or limited enforcement. The issue stops being about specific grievances and starts becoming about the right to rule. This type of act also has a signaling function. It communicates to other protesters that resistance is possible and visible. Symbols falling in public spaces can embolden wider participation by reducing the perception of state omnipotence. Fear weakens when authority appears fragile. For the state, symbolic attacks are especially destabilizing because they undermine narrative control. A toppled statue is difficult to explain away. It cannot be reframed as a misunderstanding or isolated complaint. It visually contradicts claims of unity and stability. Historically, regimes rarely collapse because of statues, but statues often fall before regimes do. The act itself does not determine outcomes. What matters is how widely it resonates, and whether the state can reassert symbolic authority. In moments of unrest, control over symbols is control over meaning. Iran is offering to sell advanced weapons systems, including ballistic missiles, drones, and warships, to foreign governments in exchange for cryptocurrency, a move that reveals how sanctions pressure is reshaping state behavior. This is not about crypto as innovation or ideology. It is about survival under constraint. When a country is heavily sanctioned, traditional financial channels become unreliable or inaccessible. Dollar settlement, correspondent banking, and international clearing systems are restricted or monitored. Under those conditions, the central problem is not finding buyers. but moving value. Cryptocurrency provides a workaround. It allows transactions to occur outside conventional banking infrastructure, increasing friction for enforcement and reducing reliance on Western-controlled rails. The weapons themselves are not the core signal, the payment method is. By explicitly naming cryptocurrency as acceptable payment, Iran is acknowledging that parallel financial systems are no longer theoretical, they are operational. Crypto becomes a tool for state-to-state exchange when formal channels are blocked. This represents a shift from crypto as a gray market instrument to crypto as a strategic financial layer. The move also reflects asymmetry. Sanctions are designed to limit access to capital and markets. Crypto does not remove those limits, but it alters the terrain. It raises the cost of monitoring, complicates attribution, and slows enforcement. That alone can be enough to keep transactions viable. There are risks. Accepting crypto exposes the seller to volatility, traceability over time, and counterparty uncertainty. But under pressure, imperfect tools are often preferable to no tools at all. This headline also signals something broader. As geopolitical fragmentation increases, financial fragmentation follows. States under pressure do not wait for permission to adapt. They experiment at the edges of the system. Crypto, in this context, is not a future vision. It is a present workaround. And when states begin using workarounds openly, it suggests the underlying system is already under strain. National bank-grade oversight is increasingly becoming the future of stablecoins, and Ripple is positioning RLUSD directly inside that framework. Ripple's approach signals a clear strategic choice. Rather than marketing stablecoins as alternatives to the banking system, RLUSD is being structured to operate alongside it. State-level oversight from the New York Department of Financial Services sets a high compliance baseline, while references to a conditional federal pathway through the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency frame RLUSD as a product designed for institutional compatibility rather than regulatory avoidance. This distinction matters. Stablecoins are no longer being evaluated solely on technical design or collateral structure. They are being judged on governance, supervision, and their ability to integrate into existing financial infrastructure. National bank-grade oversight reduces counterparty risk for institutions, simplifies regulatory treatment, and lowers barriers for adoption by payment processors, custodians, and corporate treasuries. The messaging here is directional, not ideological. It suggests that the next phase of stablecoin growth will not come from pushing against regulators, but from aligning with them. In practice, that means fewer experimental models and more emphasis on transparency, reporting, and jurisdictional clarity. The multi-chain element, enabled through Wormhole's NTT framework, adds distribution without abandoning control. Interoperability is treated as a feature layered on top of compliance, not a substitute for it. That reflects a broader trend where flexibility is acceptable only if oversight remains intact. Taken together, this positioning frames stablecoins less as decentralized disruption and more as regulated financial infrastructure. The implication is clear. As governments move to formalize digital asset rules, the stablecoins most likely to scale are those that resemble regulated financial products, not those designed to operate at the margins. RLUSD is being presented as an early example of that shift. Senator Cynthia Lummis has called on Congress to pass comprehensive crypto market structure legislation, signaling that the United States is moving toward formalizing how digital assets are regulated rather than leaving them in legal ambiguity. Market structure legislation is not about promoting crypto adoption. It is about defining jurisdiction. At present, digital asset markets exist in a gray zone, with overlapping authority between regulators and unclear rules around what constitutes a security, a commodity, or a payment instrument. That uncertainty discourages long-term investment and pushes companies to operate defensively or relocate to jurisdictions with clearer frameworks. Lummis's push reflects a recognition that ambiguity itself has become a risk. Without defined rules, enforcement actions substitute for policy, creating unpredictability for both firms and investors. Market structure legislation aims to reverse that dynamic by setting clear boundaries, assigning regulatory responsibility, and establishing consistent standards across the industry. This effort also aligns with a broader shift in U.S. strategy. Rather than attempting to suppress digital assets outright, lawmakers are increasingly focused on absorbing them into existing regulatory systems. That means clarity on custody, disclosures, market conduct, and consumer protections, all within a formal legal framework. The implications extend beyond crypto firms. Clear market structure rules make it easier for banks, asset managers, and payment providers to engage with digital assets without regulatory uncertainty. Institutional participation depends less on technology and more on legal certainty. Importantly, this is not a deregulatory move. Market structure legislation would likely expand oversight, not reduce it. The goal is not freedom from regulation, but predictability within it. Lummis's call highlights a turning point. Digital assets are no longer treated as a temporary phenomenon or an edge case. They are being positioned as a permanent part of the financial system that must be governed explicitly. Whether Congress moves quickly or slowly, the direction is clear. The era of regulatory ambiguity is ending, and formal structure is replacing improvisation. Crypto tax data collection has begun across 48 countries ahead of the implementation of the Crypto Asset Reporting Framework in 2027, marking a significant step toward global coordination in digital asset oversight. This development signals that governments are no longer treating crypto as a peripheral or temporary issue. Instead, it is being integrated into existing tax and compliance systems in much the same way as traditional financial assets. The early start to data collection reflects an effort to avoid last-minute disruption and to normalize reporting standards before formal enforcement begins. CARF is designed to close information gaps that allow cross-border crypto activity to escape tax reporting. By standardizing how transactions and holdings are reported across jurisdictions, authorities aim to reduce regulatory arbitrage and limit the ability of individuals or firms to move activity to less transparent regions. The scale matters. 48 participating countries represent a critical mass of the global financial system. When coordination reaches this level, opting out becomes costly. Crypto firms operating internationally will need to design systems that assume reporting by default rather than anonymity by exception. For users, this marks a structural shift. Crypto is moving away from a perception of opacity toward one of traceable financial activity. Compliance is no longer something that can be deferred indefinitely or managed informally. The expectation is clear. Crypto activity will be visible to tax authorities in the same way as bank accounts and securities. This does not eliminate crypto's utility, but it reshapes it. The emphasis moves from evasion to integration. Firms that cannot adapt to reporting requirements may struggle to operate at scale, while those built for compliance gain an advantage. The early rollout also sends a message about intent. Governments are preparing now, not reacting later. By the time CARF formally takes effect in 2027, reporting infrastructure will already be in place. This moment represents the institutionalization of crypto oversight, not its suppression. China has conducted military exercises near Taiwan, raising regional tensions and prompting the United States to urge Beijing to exercise restraint, underscoring how sensitive the situation in the Taiwan Strait remains. Military drills in this region are never routine. Even when framed as exercises, they serve as strategic signals. For China, such activity demonstrates capability, readiness, and resolve. It communicates that Taiwan remains a core national interest, and that pressure can be applied without crossing the threshold into open conflict. For the United States, the response is carefully calibrated. Public calls for restraint are meant to reduce escalation while reaffirming commitment to stability in the region. The language is deliberate. It avoids direct confrontation while making clear that increased military activity is being closely monitored. These exchanges matter because the Taiwan Strait is not just a geopolitical flashpoint. It is a critical corridor for global trade and a central node in the world's technology supply chain. Any sustained increase in tension raises questions about security, continuity, and risk management for governments and markets alike. Military signaling also has domestic dimensions. Exercises reinforce narratives of strength at home and serve as reminders of military capability. At the same time, they test international reactions, providing feedback on how far pressure can be applied without triggering a stronger response. The risk lies in miscalculation. Repeated drills increase the density of military assets in a confined space, raising the chance of accidents or misunderstandings. When rhetoric hardens alongside physical movements, the margin for error narrows. The U.S. call for restraint reflects an effort to keep tensions from escalating beyond signaling. Stability in the Taiwan Strait depends not on the absence of military activity, but on managing it within predictable bounds. As long as strategic competition persists, exercises and responses like these will continue. The challenge is preventing signals from turning into triggers. Google has reportedly cut its 2026 production target for its tensor processing units, after losing access to advanced CoWoS packaging capacity to NVIDIA and TSMC, highlighting a critical bottleneck in the AI supply chain. This is not a story about demand weakening, it is a story about physical constraints. The ability to scale advanced AI systems is no longer limited by software, capital, or talent. It is constrained by manufacturing capacity, specifically at the most advanced stages of chip packaging. CoWoS, short for chip-on-wafer-on-substrate, is essential for high-performance AI accelerators. It allows multiple chips and memory components to be tightly integrated, enabling the throughput required for large-scale AI workloads. Access to this process is limited, capital-intensive, and geographically concentrated. When Google reduces TPU production targets, it signals that even the largest technology firms cannot bypass these constraints at will. NVIDIA's dominance in AI accelerators is reinforced not only by its design leadership, but by its preferential access to advanced packaging through TSMC. This creates a reinforcing loop where incumbents gain scale advantages that are difficult for competitors to overcome. The implications extend beyond Google. If AI compute growth is gated by packaging capacity, then control over fabrication and assembly becomes a strategic asset. Expansion timelines are measured in years, not quarters. That makes short-term adjustments impossible and long-term planning essential. This bottleneck also connects AI competition to geopolitics. Advanced semiconductor manufacturing is concentrated in a small number of locations, making it sensitive to political risk, trade policy, and regional stability. The takeaway is simple. The future of AI is not decided solely by algorithms or investment. It is decided by who controls the physical infrastructure that turns designs into functioning systems.